my soul starts to linger, it's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me alone to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go to that place I know, always be home, home to me.
The thunder could be heard for miles. The mist appeared as smoke. When the Indians described it to Jacques Cartier, the River of Ages was about to become the River of Fame, Niagara. She has challenged poets and painters to interpret, the Daredevils to conquer, and the falls have romanced generations. And that fascination hasn't changed for centuries. Their multiple personalities have given us the stuff of storybook fiction. So let's turn a few pages in the saga of the river, the falls, and the city that adopted their name.
It has beckoned since before the days of the Roman Empire, the voice of this mystic cathedral. The waters of Michigan, Superior, Huron, Erie, leaping some 200 feet, 60 meters, over tabletop Precambrian shield to embrace their sister, Ontario, as together they rush to the sea. Niagara, the watershed of a continent. They came from afar to sit in her midst, and some stayed.
The first two settlers came in the early 1780s and were very astute, and they chose their land right adjacent to the Horseshoe Falls. They occupied all of that land that is, you know, above Queen Victoria Park today and way back. That's the settlement. But then the first record that we have of a tourist coming was the Duke of Kent coming in 1791, and he found a tavern, a resting place for travelers. And we did have a regular stagecoach line as early as 1798, operating between Chippewa and Niagara, which is Niagara on the Lake, 3 times a week, and that is 18 some years before there was any stagecoach operating outside of Toronto. The big thing was to go down to the trees and brush and through the swamp at the bottom to the edge of what is called Table Rock. Now, Table Rock was very famous because the rest was all trees and brush and you couldn't see, but when you got to Table Rock, it was flat, clear, and you sort of walked out on it, and it was much the same as Lowell Thomas's Cinerama. You know, all of a sudden you got the small screen, and then ding, you got the big panorama of Niagara Falls.
And to that big panorama they began arriving. Within the sound of Niagara, hamlets with an eye for the potential attraction of the falls sprang up, a prelude to what was yet to come. George Seibel is a local author and raconteur.
The first amalgamation was in the 1850s when Elgin and Clifton began, and we had a local entrepreneur who was a railway baron, Samuel Zimmerman, and he was the instigator behind that, bringing those two communities together into one, which is called Clifton.
The falls, even by night, remain the main attraction. It was early entrepreneurs like Zimmerman who imagined ways, man-made, that would entice the visitors to stay. Evolving over decades, Clifton Hill is but one side of Niagara. Another side is about married bliss.
A honeymooning couple is a couple who sets out to make Niagara Falls the destination for the period of their honeymoon. And the first record of anyone doing this dates to 1836. Mm-hmm. And in those days, they said that people were spending their honey lunacy. And they talked about cooing couples and so on. And of course, this coincided with the increase in travel by train and so on. And Niagara Falls became more accessible. And the influx of honeymooners was certainly in the periods from 1800s and on up into the 20s and the 30s. And we still do have honeymooners come. They're not too many years ago when I was driving down in the falls and I saw this cement truck parked beside the road. And it was painted over "Just Married," you know, and all the banners and everything but a lot of cans tied in the back. And it turns out there was a picture in the paper that a couple had come to Niagara Falls in a ready-mix cement truck on their honeymoon trip.
We Ontario farmers, together with our city cousins, own one of the best hired men in the country, the Ontario Hydro. The Hydro supplies us the electricity we use, and they tell us how to use it and how to install it on our farms. Now, when my wife and I decided to put in electricity, we went into town and talked it over with Jim Roberts, the Hydro man. And friends, there was a trip that really saved us time and money.
Well, for our farmer and his wife, Jim Roberts introduced them to the future. And that future lay in Niagara.
Power to the people. Sounds like a political uprising. In fact, it was a revolution. That expression became the battle cry in the challenge to harness the water power of the Niagara and deliver it to faraway cities and their factories. Its heroes were the leaders in the development of hydroelectricity, the first in the world.
The river of fame for some was to become a river of power for others. Early attempts had been made to harness the falls for milling, but less than 100 years after the first settler arrived, engineers developed the idea of channeling her strength to drive turbines, mechanical energy, which could generate alternating current, juice to mechanize farming, light the streets of towns and cities, and drive the wheels of industry. Some, like Sir Henry Pellet, saw it as a free enterprise, easy money scheme. But municipalities who were buying power from private companies viewed it otherwise. And by 1902, the push was on for public ownership. One of the early players was Adam Beck.
Sir Adam Beck was a London, Ontario businessman who became interested in the development of and distribution
Fred
of
Spencer,
power.
Ontario Hydro.
Detweiler and several other businessmen in that community were the original interested parties in the development of a distribution scheme which would bring power to the people of Ontario at cost. And for his work as the leader of the group that started all of this, Sir Adam Beck was made the first chairman of the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario. And because the demand for power was so great, he had to get into the field of generation with his original Hydroelectric Power Commission. And they, after some very minor starts in the northern Ontario in an experimental fashion, they planned and developed the Sir Adam Beck No. 1 generating station, which was a generating station with 10 45 megawatt generators in it, developing power from the Niagara River.
The First World War multiplied the demand for electricity overnight. The Adam Beck station put the people of Ontario into the generating business on a grand scale. The facility, which would be larger than any in the world, was situated downriver near Queenston. Running through the town, a huge canal system was built to carry the water from above the falls. It remains in use to this day. Soon the hum of generators filled the air and the magic of Niagara lit up homes throughout Ontario and New York State. The crowds that throng to the place today, tourists from near and far, are presented with an array of attractions heralding record achievement and notoriety. This is a theme that is long rooted in the story of Niagara.
The first organized tourist promotion was carried on by 3 hotel owners in 1827 who bought a derelict sailing ship, and they loaded it with a cargo of what they call ferocious animals, a cat, a dog, 2 geese, 3 bears, a raccoon, and a buffalo, which was in a cage. And they sent these poor animals over the falls. But
Terrible thing to do.
They did. They attracted thousands of people. There were in excess of 10,000 people came here. And William Lyon Mackenzie, of all people, was here. And he wrote it up extensively in his newspapers. He thought it was a great idea. And that was so successful that they tried another one in 1829, and they had a man by the name of Sam Patch jump from a ladder into the river, and that's the first stunt involving a human.
From the cliff?
Oh, no, the ladder was about 60 feet from the bank of the river. He jumped into the river, which is, it's the river, but it's not that turbulent. At the point he did, but the high diving was a big thing in those days.
George, tell me about Blondin.
He had his reputation as a funambulist and a funambulist, a rope walker.
Oh.
We just throw that in, eh?
Funambulist.
Well, it was called funambulism. And he came here in 1859, wanting to conquer another aspect of the rope walking business, and he set up a rope and crossed the gorge, and a very spectacular trip, and the first time it had ever been done, you see. It was sometime in the beginning of the summer, late June, and he made crossings all during the season. The next year he comes back in 1860, but in the crowd was a man by the name of Farini, stage name of Farini, and he decided he could do this, and he set up his rope closer to the falls where the bridges are now. He saw what Blondin was going to do, and Blondin would advertise, and he'd try to one-up him, and he'd go on the same day. And because the public's very fickle, they always went with the new fella. And when Blondin was going to cook a meal over the Whirlpool Rapids, which he cooked an omelet and ate it, took a stove out, Farini took a washing machine out and washed clothes. And but Farini, what a businessman. He chartered boats, trains, made arrangements with the transportation companies, had stands put up, made arrangements to collect money. 4 o'clock comes, he puts his money in the safe that he had, he puts on his funny suit, and he walks across the gorge. When all the things were totaled, he made $12,000 in one afternoon.
What quick money and the roar of the crowd was to the funambulists, the dare to live or die was to the barrel set. For them, Niagara was the river of fate. Ralph Grant, collector extraordinaire.
Ralph, what kind of people were these men and women, daredevils who went over Niagara Falls?
Well, they were, I don't like to use a word like weird, but they were one of a kind.
Weird and wonderful.
Yeah, they were wonderful in their own way because they, if you didn't have them, you wouldn't have any of these exciting things going on.
They used everything. They used barrels and big balls. There's a wooden barrel like this, what is it, Stathaki?
Stathica, yeah, George Stathica. He was, I think he was a cook at the time, and he decided he had to do something about Gorge Falls, make a name for himself or whatever. And he had this thing built.
That's a wooden barrel.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, as you see it on the outside, then there's another one built in, an inner one where they had a hammock in there, you see.
Oh, yeah.
They all, if you notice, all these barrels have some kind of
some kind of padding between the inside barrel?
No padding at all. They just strap themselves to these things, and that's it. And this has two ballast ends on this one here, and which is extremely heavy. They weigh about 200 pounds each. They even block off the hatch, which a man could never get out himself. He'd have to have the end taken off because it's bolted in. Did you notice these bolts?
Yeah.
And then they could open the hatch, but it was too late for him.
Then that had to be done from inside.
Yeah.
So you either come out of it alive or it busted up and you were not interested in getting out of it anyway.
Well, that's right.
Now this is Red Hill's barrel.
Red Hill Jr.
Red Hill Jr.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd get into that.
Well, I think you can make it all right. I don't.
Well,
you'd have to tuck in your tummy a little bit. Other than that,
I may get in. I don't think I'd get out. Now, what they had a kind of hammock.
that's right. If you notice those rods across that way,
Yeah.
and you notice there's a piece of hammock right there. Notice.
Yep.
See it down there?
Mm-hmm. And they'd lie down in the hammock and put straps from those
they strap
two bars.
it so that they're not sliding off. You see.
Yeah.
These things have ballast on the bottom, so that the thing sits up just as we see it here now when it's in the water.
Was this made to go over the falls or go through the rapids?
To go through the rapids.
You ever done that?
No way. No, I'm too chicken for that kind.
Yeah, me too.
If you were a visitor in the early 1900s and were not quite up to a tightrope walk, but still wanted to enjoy the spectacle of Niagara, a group of businessmen from Spain had just the thing. After all, if it worked at Mount Elia, why not here? Engineer Leonardo Torres Quevedo was dispatched to Canada, and this is what he came up with, appropriately called the Spanish Aerocar, and it's still in operation today. How to get visitors across the gorge has always been a challenge. Bridges the safest route? Well, maybe.
First one was in 1848 at the present site of the Whirlpool Rapids Bridge, and it was a foot and carriage bridge. And in 1855, it became a railway suspension bridge. But the first bridge at the falls was built in 1869, and it was a wooden suspension bridge with room for only one carriage. I rang a bell before the carriage got on, and then nobody else started from the other side.
And that one fell down.
No, that one was replaced by steel, and when they enlarged it, engineering had improved so much that they decided they didn't need any guy wires, and this was in the 1890s, and first gale that came up blew it down. They woke up one morning and it's down in the gorge, only the cable's there. The bridge that everybody thinks of and associates with Niagara Falls, the Upper Steel Arch Bridge, which became known as the Fallsview Bridge, and the Honeymoon Bridge was built, and that's the one that the ice took out in 1937.
The successful completion of two bridges across the gorge brought mixed blessings to the ferry service, which had begun with a rowboat. The bad news was the need for a ferry was finished. The good news, the clumsy steam-powered vessel had a future, carrying sightseers to the base of the falls. And so the tradition began, and so it continues. Appropriately, the name Maid of the Mist recalls the Indian legend. It has been more than 400 years since the first European learned of the thunder god Hinnom. But the spell of Niagara, that magnetism, has not diminished.
So, what is this magnetism? Well, there's the spectacle, of course. A couple of anecdotes, folklore. Annie Taylor was a struggling school teacher who wanted fame, so she jumped into her wooden barrel and over the falls she went. She survived, and she spent her remaining days selling postcards of herself and her barrel for 20 cents apiece up and down Clifton Hill. Then there was Charles Dickens. Dickens came here once for 4 or 5 days, sat down on Table Rock and contemplated, and left with renewed inspiration. And then there's the hydro story. I guess what I'm getting at is this. Charles Dickens drew inspiration. Annie Taylor looked to the falls for hope and recognition. The engineers drew power from the falls to advance our world. There is something here that is felt in different ways by different people. Something of the fragile romance between man and nature. Well, it's something to think about. The attractions will come and go. The neon lights will continue to signal change. But the thunder, the voice of the mystic cathedral, is constant. I'm Harvey Kirk.
Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go, to that place I know, it'll always be home.